Hello, and welcome back to another episode of General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm very excited to talk about this talk with you guys today. This is one that I very, very much remember and very much stood out to me from last conference, so I'm very excited to talk about it. This is Elder Rasband's talk, Words Matter, and have finally reached the Sunday morning session, which is very exciting. And as always, I very much encourage you to read or listen to or watch this talk before you come and listen to this episode, so you can get your own inspiration and kind of jog your memory about what this talk was all about. Very simply, this talk is about words and the power of words. And specifically, he talks about 3 different areas where words matter. He talks about the Lord's words, the words of prophets, and our own words. And I wanted to focus on our own words. Obviously, the words of the Lord and the words of the prophets are very important, and so I very much encourage you to read those 2 sections and think about those and think about what he says about those specifically. But something that I think can be very personal and also very kind of generalizable is talking about our own words. There's a couple of different quotes where he talks about the power of words more generally, and so I wanted to read those really quick. First of all, he says, "Unfortunately, words can be thoughtless, hasty, and hurtful. Once said, we cannot take them back. They can wound, punish, cut down, and even lead to destructive actions. They can weigh heavily on us. On the other hand, words can celebrate victory, be hopeful and encouraging. They can prompt us to think, reboot, and redirect our course. Words can open our minds to truth." And So I'm a writer and a reader and just a general lover of language. I think language is super fascinating. And honestly, I say this all the time, if I had known when I was younger that linguistics was a field of study that I could go into, I probably would have gone into linguistics. I don't really know any other languages fluently, but I know a bit of Spanish. I took it in high school, and I currently live in Canada, and their 2 official national languages are English and French. And so especially living out here on the East Coast for the last few months, we get a lot more French, and I lived in Montreal for a few months last year, in the French part of Montreal. And so I had to learn some phrases in French. I definitely had to say oh, I do not speak French in French. But it was very fascinating it is very fascinating for me to look at other languages and look at English and to see how language affects culture and how culture affects language and how those things are so intertwined, right? I mean, words and language are the way that we communicate, whether that is spoken or written. And so, I mean, try going a whole day without speaking or writing anything, and it's gonna get hard, right? It's gonna be weird. And I think, it's so interesting to see how specific words as well, or the change in vocabulary, even if it means kind of the same thing, you're still doing the same job, but you're speaking about it differently, can affect the way that we do a job, or the way that people think about the job that we are doing. And the simplest way that I talk about this is when I was in college, I worked at our school writing center, and it was very specifically not a part of the tutoring. It was its own thing. And as employees, we were not tutors. We were peer consultants, or peer writing consultants. So the word peer was really important to our boss. She was like, they have to understand that you are not an expert either, right? You're not a teacher. You're getting training and you've taken the necessary classes to be able to do this. Like you're good at English, and so like you know what you're talking about, but you are their peer. And so it's a little bit different of an interaction, right, of coming in and speaking to somebody who is your age or your a fellow student rather than a teacher. And then consultant was, we are not tutors. We were consulting on your paper. And so there were times where we taught grammar, like very basic, like comma should go there, especially to a lot of ESL students. But we were really there to help people to grasp how a paper overall should be structured. And so it wasn't just, we weren't a proofreading service. We weren't gonna do the paper for you. We weren't gonna sit and redline your entire paper, right? We were there to be a consultant. It was a conversation that we had with these students. We would sit down and we would say, okay, what's your assignment? Can you explain it to me? Show me what you've done so far. What questions do you have? And it was really a conversation, and it wasn't all for already written stuff either. We would help with brainstorming and kind of any part of the writing process for a paper, even like citing your sources and bibliography. And it really did like change the way that I thought about my job. If I had said, oh, you're a writing tutor, right, that's a very different connotation than a writing consultant. And so the way that we speak about things and the words that we use and the tone that we use can really impact the way that people understand our meaning. And so often I think you'll probably notice in a lot of my episodes I say, this is the impression that I got as a child, or this is the impression that I get. This is how it means to me. This is what it reads like to me. This is how it sounds to me. Because sometimes, especially when I'm listening to General Conference, I'm slightly distracted, or I'm paying attention, but I'm hearing it in a very different context than when I go back and read it later. And so when I hear it, I may hear it completely differently, and I go back and read it, and I'm like, oh, that's probably what he meant. In the moment, it sounded a lot different, and it sounded so, it sounded a bit more intense, or less intense, or whatever, right? And so I think it really does matter how we say things and what we say about things. And he makes a similar comment down near the end of his talk. He says, our words can be supportive or angry, joyful or mean, compassionate or tossed aside. In the heat of the moment, words can sting and sink painfully deep into the soul and stay there. Our words on the internet, texting, social media, or tweets take on a life of their own, so be careful what you say and how you say it. In our families, especially with husbands, wives, and children, our words can bring us together or drive a wedge between us. And I think that's literally everything that I was just saying, right? Depending on what words you use, depending on the tone that you have, your language can mean something very different than what you may intend it to mean. And so being careful in our words, being careful in what we say, taking the time to think before we speak or type or text can be really good. I love also that he talks about like texting and social media and tweets and things like that. It's really hard to read someone's tone over message, right? That's why I love emojis so much, honestly. that I can kind of convey my tone with an emoji, right? I can convey my emotions, because when you're texting or you're reading someone's social media post or whatever, you can't hear their tone, you can't read their facial expressions or their body language either, right? So you can't tell if they're smiling or if it's a joke or they're being sarcastic, right? And so our words on social media, and even our spoken words, even if it is a video of yourself, you can convey more things with your facial expressions or with your tone. It can often happen in kind of a vacuum, where we just put our words out there and we don't have a conversation. It does not always get put into context, a broader context of whatever conversation is happening. And so it's really just important to give that context, or to, when you're reading somebody else's text or social media post or watching their videos, to really understand the broader context of what they're saying. And that could be for good or for bad, right? You may watch a video and be like, oh, they're so sweet, I understand what they're saying. And then, or like, hey, yeah, that totally makes sense. I really understand that. And then, get more context or more bits of information and realize, oh no, what they're saying is totally wrong, or that's not cool, things like that. And it can go the other way too. It's like, oh, they're being so rude, they're being so whatever, and you get more context of the situation, like, oh, I understand why they use those words, they use that tone. And so, anyway, overall, words are important. And so, I have 2 questions for you today. One is just an awareness question. How do the words around you that you read or hear or even say impact your daily life? Whether that's at work or at school or at church, right? How does that impact the way that you do your work, the way that you live your life? And then how can you watch your words in order to impact those around you in a positive way? If you're noticing the words you say are always negative or always complaining or always whatever, maybe you can change that up, right, to impact somebody else's day in a good way. I really am very passionate about this, as you can probably tell. And so I really love talking about words and the importance of our language. And I even think about a very simple example of this in the church is our switch to ministering, right? The program, ministering, is the same program as home teaching and visiting teaching. And I know people will probably disagree with that, but home teaching and visiting teaching was the same thing. You were assigned to either families or individuals, and you then took care of them, right? It was a little bit different in the way that it was structured. You were kind of expected to go once a month and share a message, right? There was kind of, there was something different about that kind of a thing, right? But the base purpose was the same, is that you were assigned these people and that you were supposed to see how they were doing and be someone that they could rely on. Ministering is the same thing. You just don't have you have to go once a month, right? It's more based on personal preference of the person who is doing the ministering and also being ministered to. If they don't want a monthly visit, or they don't want a monthly visit with a message, they just want a text, they want a phone call, they want to drop by with some cookies or something like that, right? But you're still assigned to someone and tasked with taking care of them and making sure they're doing okay and seeing if they need any help. And it's just a different name. Home teaching, visiting teaching has teaching in the word, right? So we're going to teach a lesson, we're going to teach them, and it can be it can feel like a very different relationship between teacher and student, rather than ministering brother, ministering sister. And ministering has a very different context, right? A different connotation of I'm ministering to you, I'm helping you, I'm serving you. And so that opens up a lot of different possibilities rather than just I'm going to go and teach a lesson once a month. And so pay attention. That's really what my questions are all about, right? Is pay attention to the words that you're surrounded with throughout the day and how they impact you and how the words that you say can impact others. So that is all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I very much appreciate it. And if you have anything to add to the conversation, you can drop a comment here or over on Instagram or Facebook, or you can email me or message me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll talk to you all next time.